tell you tonight that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, has an answer to every problem that you face. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, has an answer to every burden that you carry.
If he had not become a man, if he had not put on a body of flesh and blood, he could not have redeemed us. He had to become a man to die.
In America, we don't worship government, we worship God. We want all children to have the opportunity to know the blessings of God. We will not allow the government to censor sermons, to restrict the free speech of our pastors and our preachers and the people that we most respect.
And welcome. Thank you for joining us here on Friday night for Talking Points from God's Gospel Radio Ministries, the Seat of a Nation. I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish. Thank you for being with us. If you've never tuned in to God's Gospel Radio Ministry, we do it simply here. Do it simple. We are a ministry, a Christian ministry that plays good old Southern gospel music. We have a lot of new, modern age gospel music, Christian music, and we welcome it all because the most important thing is Jesus Christ, the gospel of Christ. I am not your music guy. I am into the political scene. I enjoy sports, but politics right now is the main thing in our country because of the 2020 presidential election. We will continue our study with the 2020 presidential election. We call it a study because there is so much to go into. There are many, many different numbers that we have to dive into. And since we were last on Monday night, I believe, there have been many developments. There have been many storylines. There have been a lot of things that we want to dive into. Here at Talking Points for the Seat of a Nation, me and Mike do the Seat of a Nation program, which used to air every day, and then it went to 3 times a week, and now we haven't done it in quite a while. Our schedules do not allow us to get together and do the Seat of a Nation program. We had a podcast going, but that's been halted for a little bit. So let's hope we can get back into that. But Talking Points is simply talking points for a particular subject. And the talking points that I'm going to give to you surrounds the 2020 presidential election. There's a lot at stake here. It's not just a 4-year presidential election. I've had people tell me, well, maybe Trump can run in 2024. He's not thinking about 2024. This is a man that understands what happened. He won on November the 3rd, 2020. We know he won because we were there. We saw the election results. We saw the numbers. We understood what was happening. We understood that we were about to witness President re-elect Donald Trump. This was an event that we had been looking forward to for a year now. We understood what was going to happen. We didn't understand how the Democrats were going to tackle it, though. And it wasn't just the Democratic Party. It was also the Republican Party. You have SWAT monsters on both sides, and that's sad to say. But you know what? It is what it is, and I know that people do not like to hear that. But you know what? Again, it is what it is. Eventually, we're going to have to come to grips with, we have the illusion of freedom. Our freedom, at least many of them, they're not real. Our freedoms aren't real. And that's sad because we've come a long way since 1980s. We've come a long way since 2000, actually. But even more so since 1980s. I was born in 1986. I do not remember President Ronald Reagan. As much as I love studying the man, I just don't remember him. So the best thing I've ever seen is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, as far as what he's up against, what he's been up against since day one, well, he has done more for America than any other president in our country's history. He's probably not as important in terms of where we came from such as George Washington or James Madison or Thomas Jefferson, because they founded the country. They wrote the Constitution. They put the system together. Donald Trump is restoring that system, the system that has been taken apart for many years now. It's not just an effort that came together since I was born. It's been an effort that's, well, since probably the early 1900s. Maybe you can even argue since the 1800s. Andrew Jackson was warning against a central bank in the early 1800s. He called the Rothschilds vipers. And he understood what would happen if we ever had a Federal Reserve or central bank. When we got one, well, it quickly backfired on America. It didn't backfire on the bankers or those in charge. It backfired on we, the people. Now, I want to read scripture because this is a Christian program. We are a Christian ministry. This is a Christian program that emphasizes the importance of God's Word. Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. To the Jew first and to the Greek. He doesn't leave anyone out. Before we go any further, if you ever tune in, you've known that since we've started doing talking points since the election, we always first, before we go deep into our study, go to Mr. Lynn Wood, who has himself become a rock star, much like Donald Trump. So let's go to Mr. Lynn Wood.
And so with that being said, we have been able to bring someone into the fold. And I'm talking about someone who's probably has one of the most brilliant minds, legal minds, in this country. Yes. If you think I'm lying, ask CNN. And some of those others who attack everyday people and try to destroy their reputation and change their lives forever. Y'all join me in bringing in a fighter who's fighting for you, for Georgians, and this president. Y'all welcome Lynn Wood here.
Fight back.
I love you.
Amen.
I love you too if you're not behind the camera and you remember the media. How you doing? I was sitting around Tuesday night watching the election returns. I've loved politics all my life, since I first voted in 1972. And I saw what I assumed was going to happen. I saw President Trump building up what I believed was going to be almost an historic landslide victory.
It was.
And then all of a sudden, every network, including Fox News, started doing what they do best. They started lying to the American public. And they took a victory from Donald Trump and they called it a lie. They took a defeat from Joe Biden and lied and said he won. And they sent you to bed, turning off the count of the vote so you could wake up the next morning like I did and go, what happened?
And so with that.
So what happened? A lot of information has come out since that speech was given. We know more now about what happened. We know why it happened. We also know how it happened. When we went to bed, at least when most of y'all went to bed, I didn't go to bed that night. I stayed up to watch the rest of the election, hoping that it would be over then. I should have realized that they were going to pull something. And by they, I don't just mean the Democrat Party, but both sides, all sides, the swamp. When we talk about the swamp, we talk about not just northern cities or blue states. We also refer to Republicans, independents, libertarians in China, Germany, the world. Because, as we've learned, these bad actors were involved in the 2020 presidential election. I'm not sure what media outlets most people listen to anymore. I've turned Fox off. I do not ever care to watch Fox again, which saddens me because Fox was such a big part of my life. With that said, there have been some other bad actors or people that I used to listen to that turned to be bad actors. One that's really surprising me is Ben Shapiro, who is a great journalist. He is very young and very dedicated at what he does, but he listens to, well, the same garbage that he should be turning off. His reports are based on nothing more than what the left-wing media puts out there. You base your decision based on what lies are being put out there, which there's no logic in that. If CNN reports something, you should not listen to that report. Most times you should turn that off, throw it away. The same with Fox News. Now Ben Shapiro seems to be going in the same direction. He doesn't believe that Donald Trump has any path forward to victory. And based on what? Based on what an executive or someone at Dominion tells him, tweets out, or puts in a newspaper. You're listening to the very source that stole the election. They were part of it. Eric Coomer, who was an executive, or probably still is an executive there at Dominion, says that he's going to ensure that Donald Trump does not win the election. He didn't say it in those words. I'm paraphrasing. I'm being nice with what he actually said. But you're going to believe those people when they're packing up and heading out of town? It's a Canadian company. Dominion is. It's a Canadian company. And you're going to trust them simply because they say nothing was gone wrong? Nothing went wrong with the election? I just don't believe that's honest journalism. I honestly do not. I'm not saying that you have to dismiss everything that the corporate media says, but we have learned over the last 3.5 years you can't believe anything they put out. 95% of what they put out is probably garbage, probably more than that. Sidney Powell said the other day that she knew the swamp was bad. But after researching it over the last few weeks, it's at least 20% worse than what she realized. 20%. We have talked on this program, The Seed of a Nation and Talking Points, for some time now that if you took out all the bad actors from our government, you'd have just a handful left, maybe a quarter of those left. And that's sad to see, or sad to hear, but when you look at what is going on in our election with what we have found out, you look at Brian Kemp, who is a red state governor who sold out to China, and Doug Ducey, the governor of Arizona, who probably as well sold out to China. I don't know what monies runs through the state of Arizona, but I can tell you this much: that is a red state. It is a conservative state, and suddenly it went for Joe Biden. I don't buy it. It didn't go for Barack Obama either time that he ran, and suddenly it goes for someone who is as liberal as Barack Obama, but he's nowhere near as charming as Obama. Obama, say what you want to about him, he had charisma. He knew how to talk. He was boring, but he knew how to talk. He knew how to get things done, at least in a sense he did. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't a dumb man. Now, I can't say that about Joe Biden. I don't believe he's competent. I'm not sure if he's got dementia. I'm not sure what his problem is. Some people believe he's just dumb. Whatever the situation may be, I'll never buy that he beat Barack Obama's numbers either time in 2008 or 2009. Recently, we've heard from Michael Flynn and a few others, including Lynn Wood, who have both told the president to declare martial law. There's been a lot of conversation about this, as you might well expect it to get a lot of attention. Can the president actually declare martial law? Well, the answer is probably not as easy as you would assume, because the Constitution doesn't really talk about actions of this nature, about such powers. It does give the president such measures in certain situations, certain powers in certain situations. And as we have known, martial law has been declared in the past. So there are different situations where there is a precedent for it. But I don't think Donald Trump really wants to do that right now. And I know he doesn't, because the other night when he gave the most important speech of his life, he said he didn't want to entertain that yet. And I'm paraphrasing there, but he gave a great speech, so go watch it if you haven't seen it. If you have heard it, if you have watched it, go re-watch it, re-listen. It was a great speech. It was 46 minutes long. When the President of the United States is laying out evidence for voter fraud, or of election fraud, whichever, you have to know his lawyers have so much more. When Tucker Carlson asked Sidney Powell, where's the evidence? When ABC, NBC, CBS, and so forth, they continue to spout every day there is no evidence. You have to understand these people are lying to you. Rudy Giuliani is having hearings on nearly a daily basis with real life people. He has over 5,000 sworn affidavits. So much evidence is coming out of these hearings that there's no way you can any longer say there is no evidence. If you're a logical, free-thinking person, there's no way you can say that. Now, I am saddened to say this. I do not believe that a lot of people are able to freely think for themselves, to logically form an opinion. And I've known some people like this, and it saddens me to say that because, well, I don't like to think that way about people, but it's true. A lot of people just cannot think for themselves. They cannot form an opinion. I've talked to people who were not sure about what I thought or what I was saying. Then they talked to someone else, and because of what someone else told them, they formed their opinion based on that. Not what I said or what they actually believe, but what the other person said. It's sad, but it's true. And these are the people that you want to put in charge of the country. But when we look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution states this. Talking about the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. That's from the Constitution. You can interpret these things differently. There is a precedent for doing it. Abraham Lincoln did it in 1863, right after the Civil War began. And he did so for obvious reasons. And we won't get really deep into them. He did suspend habeas corpus, and President George W. Bush did as well in 2006. So there is precedence to do that. Again, Donald Trump doesn't want to do that just yet. It's a last-ditch measure. It's one of those things where if that's all you've got left, then you play it. But you hope it does not come to that. You really don't. Honestly, it's going to come to that. I'll put it this way. It's going to come to that, but you hope he doesn't have to declare it and then hold a new election. You hope the legal process will play out the way it should. The president explained the other day that if he loses, that's fine. But he has to lose fairly. It's like during the 1990s, 80s, and 90s in baseball, and 2000 as well. These players were breaking records left and right, but they weren't doing it fairly. The guys that came before them, the ones that were doing it the right way, they were cheated. They were cheated out of their records, which is why so many of those records don't even matter anymore. The MLB home run record used to be the most prestigious home run record in all of sports. Now it means nothing, like most of these records. That's what these guys have done in the game of baseball, and that's what these guys have done to our elections. Now, again, Don't be naive. This is not the first time cheating has ever happened in an election, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, but we've never seen it out in the open like this. They're not even hiding it. And if they are, they're doing a very poor job of hiding it. What's coming out can no longer be denied. What's coming out of these hearings must be taken literally, because these things literally happen. You can no longer say that it's based on a baseless accusation. Fox News is good about casting that word around. Hebrews 13:2 reads, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." Proverbs 22:1 explains, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold." Proverbs 10:9 is clear, "He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known." One of my favorite television shows, The Twilight Zone, its creator, Rod Serling, points out, for civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized. This is where martial law is going to come into play, because it's going to be so uncivilized that the military is going to have to step in. After all this stuff plays out, and Donald Trump is again the winner, martial law will have to be declared. I hope the election does not have to be reheld, although with everything that's come out, a new one should be held, and not with mail-in ballots, but with a voter ID and in-person voting. No machines this time. There has to be something done. But I don't know if we're going to see a new election held. Proverbs 4:19 points out, "The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble." We are battling wickedness, evil, demonic wickedness. These people do not know God. They do not know good. God is good, and they that know God love, for God is love. But these people don't know God. They don't love. It's all about greed. The love of money is the root of all evil. Think about the information that came out of the hearings that were held by Rudy Giuliani. This is not something that we should just stick our nose up at. Wisconsin the other day, there was a lawsuit that was rejected, I guess you would say, by the Supreme Court. The Associated Press was reporting that the lawsuit was denied because of its merits. However, that's just not true. It was rejected because the Supreme Court of Wisconsin stated that the Trump administration needed to first file it with the lower court. Okay, so they will do that. When it's rejected by the lower court, they will go to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and we will see what happens from there. This is why you have to be careful about with whom you listen to. Because, well, if you don't listen or read within context, then you'll end up, well, just like a Joe Biden supporter. You'll have no idea what's going on. And I hate to say it like this, a lot of my family's that way as well. A lot of my friends are that way. They'll tell me that I'm crazy because I believe this stuff based on the idea that their television tells them that I'm wrong. I've got a neighbor and a friend who calls me every so often, a few times a week, and he'll start hinting around at the election. And he'll tell me how I'm wrong because one of his friends tells him that there's a 1 in a million shot that Donald Trump wins this. On Newsmax, the first time I found Newsmax, there was a man named Mark Haplin on the show. He's a legal analyst at Newsmax who explained that a judge does not want to have to decide on disenfranchising voters. Disenfranchising voters would be taking away their right to vote. And I get that. But as we saw in the state of Pennsylvania, there is a process in changing election laws. If you change it in the middle of the game, you have to do it by a process. They bypassed that process because they knew the state legislature there in Pennsylvania would not go along with it. There was a judge that extended the mail-in ballot date 3 days. It bypassed the state legislature entirely. That's unconstitutional. That's illegal to do that. So those ballots have to be thrown out. Now, when we talk about disenfranchising them, this is what that means. Those people voted. They sent in their vote based on what that judge ruled. Are you wanting to tell them no, that their votes don't count? Although to begin with, there was a certain date and it was extended. Extensions do happen. But again, you have to go through the process, the right process. There is a legal and a right way of doing it. So 2 wrongs do not make a right. They should have had it in by the original date, and the judge should not have extended that date without going through the state legislature. So 2 wrongs do not make a right. I know in this current system in which we live, the secular system in which Satan is in control of or has reigns over, that's the way most people think, but that's not the legal process to do this thing, to get things done. Now, when we talk about Dominion and Smartomatic, we talked about these programs different times on the Talking Points program. And there's a reason for that, because the way they are designed. These programs are used in almost every state that holds presidential elections. We learned just how evil and how compromised these systems are from Dennis Montgomery, who is a former CIA contractor turned whistleblower. Dennis Montgomery explained how these systems work as he built the algorithm. He is a former foreign surveillance system, or he built the hammer, which is a former surveillance system. It was first created as a way to track jihadist terrorists after 9/11 and the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Then the CIA started using it to surveil us, we the people. Go figure that. They're compromised. Now, Dennis Montgomery went to the CIA, or went to the FBI, which was headed at the time by James Comey in 2015. He gave them evidence upon evidence, 47 hard drives full of evidence, millions and millions of pieces of evidence, showing them what this system was doing. Comey didn't care. He sat on it. They never thought Donald Trump would win in 2016 and none of this stuff would come out. If Hillary had won, they would just bury it like they did in 2015. Now we fast forward a little bit, and we go to some of these cities and states, like Nevada, for example. There is a lot of good information coming out of Nevada. During one of those hearings, the fraud hearings in Nevada, Jesse Benall, who is the Trump campaign lawyer there in Nevada, he filed suit stating these claims here. And this is a lot of claims right here. For example, 19,000 non-Nevadians voted. A lot of people to vote who don't live in Nevada. 42,000 people double voted. You take that away, and that lead shrinks greatly. 15,000 commercial addresses or vacant lots. You're not supposed to have a commercial address, especially at a vacant lot. 8,000 fake addresses, and 1,500 dead people voted. If that's not fraud, I don't know what fraud is. I literally just do not know. when we look at the bellwether counties in the country, Joe Biden lost every single one of those, but one. But one. He also trailed Clinton's vote totals, except, and we talked about this previously on an episode of Talking Points, in four large cities. Those cities: Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee. In other words, the math just doesn't add up. If he lost in all these bellwether counties, and he lost 84% of the counties nationwide, then how did Joe Biden win the election? How did he happen to gain or gather 80 million votes? Philip Klein, who is the former Attorney General of Kansas and the District Attorney Director at the Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society and a professor at Liberty University, writes this on Twitter. And sometimes we just have to rely on Twitter for our news sources because we can't rely on television journalism anymore, journalists, so-called journalists. He writes that the number of potentially fraudulent ballots we've identified in Georgia is over 30 times greater than the margin separating Trump and Biden. We'll figure that. The Amistad Project also filed a motion last night in Maricopa County Superior Court contesting the results of the 2020 presidential election. Maricopa County is in Arizona. Expert data analysis indicates hundreds of thousands of potentially illegal votes were counted, while over 100,000 illegal ballots were not counted. And guess what? They were not counted for Donald Trump. This tweet was posted December the 3rd, 2020 at 10:30 p.m. Why? Do you remember when Atlanta, Georgia, or Fulton County had explained that they had stopped counting and they told everyone to go outside of the county center? They made them go home. They made Republican poll watchers leave. The other ones were supposed to leave as well, right? They were supposed to stop counting, but they continued to count in secret. The ballots continued to be counted. No Republicans were left. They weren't allowed in the room. They continued the counting until 1 a.m. And then, all of a sudden, there was a huge spike of votes for Joe Biden. How does that happen? How does that continue to happen? Because it wasn't just one city this happened in. It was many cities. On other programs, we talked about Russell Ramsland, who filed his own affidavit. And this was a really compelling affidavit that he found because of the evidence and the statistics that he does have in there. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single one of those, but I do want to talk about a couple of the claims that he's got in his affidavit, including there are 4 spikes that total 384,733 ballots allegedly processed in a combined interval of only 2 hours and 38 minutes. This is physically impossible when you take into consideration the equipment that was available at the locations in which the counting took place. Physically impossible. Ramsland explains that they looked at for processing ballots, and he cross-referenced that with both the time it took at each location and the performance specifications that we obtained using the serial numbers of the scanning devices used. That's amazing. Okay, so when you take 60 minutes without accounting for problems like paper jams or replacing the cover sheets or loading time, they assume that 2,000 ballots per hour in field conditions, which he does know that this is probably generous, then the calculation yields a sum of 94,867 ballots. That's the maximum number of ballots that could be counted or processed within that given amount of time. But the spikes were almost 4 times that number. How does that happen? Now, either I'm missing something or they're lying. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I'm not the brightest light or bulb in the light socket, but I want to tell you something. The math just doesn't add up. He continues on with the voter turnout reached approximately 83% until that tabulated period when it reached 83%. Donald Trump was generally winning between 55 and 60% of every turnout point. That's pretty good. That's almost 6 out of every 10 voters went for Donald Trump. However, that was the case until the county was closed at 2 in the morning. Then the situation dramatically reversed itself, starting with a series of impossible spikes shortly after counting was supposed to have to stop. You understand that? He was winning until the counting was supposed to have stopped. Several spikes cast solely for Joe Biden could possibly be produced in the Dominion system by preloading batches of blank ballots in files such as write-ins, then casting them all for Biden using the override procedure to cast write-in ballots, which is available to the operator of the system. Thomas McInerney, and we did play his video a few programs back, explain how this works. And Mr. Ramsland is going into greater detail here. Remember, the Dominion system, the scorecard system, and so forth, they are similar in nature. They keep it within 3% of whomever they're trying to favor. They keep the margin within 3% so people do not get very suspicious. But when you see things like this, then you understand the skepticism that is going on here, that is around the country. And it's not just with Republican voters, as a third of Democrat voters think that something fishy happened. They actually see beyond this. They see beyond the smoke and mirrors, and I am glad to hear this. But it's statistically impossible to explain, as is the impossibility of the votes cast to number of voters. Some of these precincts, some of these cities, and some of these states had 100+% turnout. When we look at Wisconsin, in the last 20 years, their biggest turnout, I believe, was 72%. This year, we've seen almost a 20% spike at 89 point something percent, almost 90%. And that's just in the last 20 years. Even when you've got countries like Australia and Iraq where you're ordered to vote, the best you'll ever get is 90%. Even when you're ordered to vote, not every voter turns out. Retired Army Colonel Bill Waldron, who is an expert on automated voting machines and knows all about the corrupt machines, explained a little bit during the Arizona hearing. He explained that, these are his exact words, Arizona was a little bit different. It had a pretty strong rise right up at the door, the first part of voting day, whereas the other states had a gradual increase in votes. But this injection spike at 8:06 p.m. is 143,100 votes that were injected. That was in excess of what the machines could have processed. Even in different states, the situations were similar. You're seeing many of the same situations play out. It's as though they were corroborating with one another. Please be advised that Pima County Recorder and the Democratic Party added fraud votes in the initial count to the vote by mail totals released at 8 p.m. on November the 3rd of 2020. That was an email sent to Mr. Waldron from, I don't know if you want to call it a whistleblower, but it was a source that allowed him to understand what was at play. He already understood what was at play, but he was getting more and more information from people who were actually on the ground. This is why we cannot just toss these witnesses away, as convenient as that would be to so many in the media on both sides of the political aisle. We cannot do this. Waldron continues, so this coincides with what we observed in the data analytics at that spike. We weren't aware of this email until after the fact, so there were approximately 35,000 fraud votes added to each Democratic candidate's vote totals, and that's in Pima County, Arizona. 35,000 votes is a lot of votes. We see that Arizona Representative Paul Gozer, and I've seen him on Newsmax several different times, explained this morning on America Agenda that it looks like the courts are going to have to intercede here. And I think the rulings are going to start being very, very favorable, that there was a concerted effort. It was very thought out. And we're seeing this all over the country. It was well thought out. It wasn't just something that was planned overnight. You cannot put this together overnight. He explains, because when you have a president that overperforms himself from 2016 by 15 million votes, Joe Biden underperforms Hillary Clinton in every state except for these swing states, something is up. Something is wrong here. And we are seeing affidavit after affidavit after affidavit. Films of boxes of votes coming, planes coming in and unloading ballots. So this isn't over, and there is plenty of time to do what's right. And I think that's what's most important, to get it right. On top of something else, we have a company that's very suspect. And that was from the president. But do you understand that I'm not the only one that thinks the math just doesn't add up? So if I'm raising the concern, and Mr. Gozer is as well, there's something to this. The math stinks. Biden won 16.7% of the counties in the country. Trump almost won 84% of the counties nationwide. I had a friend tell me that the county that Joe Biden won, they were so large that it made up for that discrepancy. That's not possible. Even if all the counties that Trump won were small, that's 84% of the counties in the nation. Donald Trump goes on to explain, when he talks about the company being suspect, its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you could press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of system is this? We have to go to paper. Maybe it takes longer, but the only secure system is paper. In other words, he's saying, let's just get it right. Regardless of how much time it takes, let's just get it right. The Democrats used to be all for investigations until the investigations start going somewhere with them. You remember the last couple of summers, it was investigation after investigation after investigation. Adam Schiff promised he had something. He didn't have anything. Why is that? I think we know why. Donald Trump explains millions of votes were cast illegally in the swing states alone, and if that's the case, the results of the individual swing states must be overturned and overturned immediately. And you know something? He's absolutely correct. And they will eventually be. Again, the president had evidence. He didn't just have talking points like I'm giving you here. He had evidence. He explained, look at this in Wisconsin. A day after the election, Biden receives a dump of 143,379 votes at 3:42 a.m. when they learned he was losing badly. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. He explains the fraud was executed. Now I want to stop right there, because I want to quote from Sidney Powell's lawsuit that she filed the day before Thanksgiving, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. It explains the fraud was executed by many means, but the most fundamentally troubling, insidious, and egregious is the systemic adaptation of old-fashioned ballot stuffing. On previous episodes of Talking Points, we have talked about this lawsuit that was filed the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 104-page lawsuit. It was massive, and it had so much information in it. Powell continues. It has now been amplified and rendered virtually invisible by computer software created and run by domestic and foreign actors for that very purpose. Mathematical and statistical anomalies rising to the level of impossibilities, as shown by affidavits of multiple witnesses, documentation, and expert testimony, events this scheme across the state of Georgia. That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of evidence right there. Now, when we talk about the state of Georgia, here's what come out of that hearing the other day. And this is big. This is really big. At a minimum, 96,000 votes must be disregarded. That's what was in the lawsuit. But according to Ray Smith, the lead counsel in Georgia for the Trump campaign, 2,506 felons voted in the state of Georgia. Now, I have learned that certain felons can vote, but 2,506 felons voted illegally in the state of Georgia. This one here is puzzling. It just gets me. 66,248 underage and therefore ineligible people illegally registered to vote before their 17th birthday, when the law requires 17 and a half years of age. That just gets me. Why would they allow those people to vote? Do they even care? At least 2,423 individuals voted who were not listed as registered. They got to throw those out. 1,043 individuals to cast ballots who illegally registered to vote using a post office box. That's a lot of people. Now, I've also read 1,062 individuals at UPS store addresses, and I'm assuming. Okay, no, I'm wrong. 1,062 people using the UPS store addresses. This is 1,043 individuals who are registered to vote using a P.O. box address. I mean, it just gets more and more interesting. 4,926 people who registered to vote after the state's voter registration date. What does that mean? Ray goes on to say that thereby canceling their Georgia voter registration. They had to be thrown out. We can no longer continue to allow this stuff to go uncontested. We have to contest these things. 10,315 or more individuals who were deceased or dead by the time of the election. 395 people who had cast ballots in another state, which is illegal in both states. You're seeing a lot of this in multiple states. 15,700 people who filed a national change of address with the Postal Service prior to the November the 3rd election date. 40,279 people who had moved from one county to the next at least 30 days prior to the election without properly registering to vote in their new location, which is a violation of state law. And it just goes on and on. And 2 hours ago, and it's been a little bit longer than that now, President Trump tweeted out, "Thank you." He says, "Thank you to Senate President Karen Fann and House Speaker Russell Bowers and all for what you are doing in Arizona. A fast check of signatures will easily give us the state. Votes against have been reduced to a very small number." And this is in thank you to a press release today by the Arizona State Legislature, which explains that legislative leaders call for audit of Maricopa County election software and equipment. When we look in the state of Georgia, yesterday there was a video that was released showing poll workers, as already mentioned, counting votes long after other people were sent home. But the video shows much more than just counting. They show different people going and getting suitcases from underneath tables. And you've probably seen this video. And it's shocking. It's a blockbuster. In fact, it's so big that once Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, saw it, he ordered for an audit of the votes. We'll see where that goes. But Ruby Freeman is the name of the woman who is seen going to get votes, these suitcases. And they put them through the tabulation machines. Why is that? The room cleared at 10:30 p.m. 4 people stayed behind. Thousands of ballots pulled from under a table in suitcases and scanned. How can that continue to happen? It can't continue to happen. It wasn't just this city where it took place. It was many cities where these activities took place. And it can no longer happen. It has to stop. I mean, it has to stop like right now. I just want to read some statistics that's found all over the internet. I mean, this is not something that I pull out of thin air. These are some statistics that go along with election fraud, whether it's voter fraud done by the voter themselves or it's election fraud committed by those in charge of the election system. For example, late on election night, and I'm sure many of you saw this, Donald Trump was way ahead. He was comfortably ahead, an insurmountable lead in some of these states, when many swing states just stopped counting ballots, like they did in Georgia and in Pennsylvania. They did so for an hour in Arizona. Why? In many cases, and maybe all of the cases, observers were removed from the counting facilities. Why? Why were Republican poll watchers and observers not allowed in there? We've already talked about the statistically impossible spikes that occurred in the 2020 election, especially in the period of time in which the counting stopped or was supposed to have stopped. These spikes or vote counts were not just abnormal, but they were impossible, as Ramsland has already pointed out. We saw unusually large size of dumps and hundreds of thousands of votes, and 90% and above for Joe Biden. they were either for Joe Biden or they were switched from Trump to Joe Biden. 90% and above, that's impossible. I don't like to be a downer, but that's impossible. And again, we saw there in Pennsylvania where 23,000 absentee ballots have impossible postal return dates. We're talking about the day the ballots were sent out, they were returned, or the day after, and in some cases, even before they were mailed out. How does that happen? It can't happen. 86,000 have such extraordinary return dates, they raise suspicious questions or serious questions of their validity, which is why the Pennsylvania Senate and House have filed joint legislation to have those electoral votes given to President Trump. And again, just the math just doesn't add up, and it doesn't. We have talked about this time and time again. Statistical anomalies. For example, in Georgia, and we keep going back to Georgia, and I remember on election night, Karl Rove was saying it was all about Georgia. It was all about Georgia, Georgia, Georgia. But in Georgia, Biden overtook Trump with 89% of the votes counted. For the next 53 batches of votes, Biden led Trump by the same exact 50.05 to 49.95% margin of every single batch, which that seems statistically impossible to me. It is perplexing that all statistical anomalies and tabulations were in Joe Biden's favor. If they were going to cheat, you'd think they would cheat a little bit for Trump, showing that, well, this wasn't really cheating. They wouldn't, you would think that they would not want to arouse suspicion, so they would do things a little bit more on the up and up. But Joe Biden was so far behind that they couldn't afford to do that. They didn't stop to think. And this is what happens. They got caught. They got caught red-handed. And guess what? The president knows it. We know it. His legal team knows it. And they know it. This has been some interesting events that have gone on in the last few days. We're seeing things that we never thought we would. Just analyzing Trump over the last 4 years. Trump's a fighter. When you hit him, he hits back even harder, and he doesn't stop. In the beginning, he wasn't saying anything. He was quiet. On that Saturday when the media awarded Joe Biden their presidency, Donald Trump was playing golf. He wasn't fretting it. Then he allowed his legal team to go to work. Mr. Lynn Wood there, for example, came on board. He's not part of the legal team to say. He's not being paid by President Trump, but he is working on behalf of we the people. And thank God for men and women like Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell. But now Donald Trump is talking. And Donald Trump knows that he's got the goods. And it won't be long before all the goods are out there. We're going to see it all. I don't know when. I don't know what to tell you what's going to happen next, because your guess is as good as mine. But I do know this. I trust the president. I trust his legal team. I trust the process to play out the way it should. I understand that people do not think that these judges are going to tell voters their votes don't count because of illegal activities. But I do believe that there is enough integrity in at least 5 of these judges that Donald Trump will somehow, whether it's through the Supreme Court or through Congress, that he will again be the president of the United States. But in the meantime, we have to stay patient. We have to be calm. We have to remain calm because it is a fight. It's not going to be over with immediately. This is not a movie where we know the end in 2 hours. It's going to take, as you can see, another 2 weeks. But you know what? In the end, it will be all worth it. For us here at Talking Points, from God's Gospel Radio Ministries, the Seed of a Nation, we are out of time. But we do thank each and every one of you for joining us. It has been a pleasure being with you. This is your first time with us. Thank you for being with us. Go back and listen to the show. If you couldn't watch it in its entirety, listen to it. Follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms. Follow me on all the platforms. But look for me on Rumble. I love Rumble. That's my preference right there. That's my social media preference is Rumble. Dan Bongino has done a great job with that company. He's invested in it. And I like YouTube, but YouTube is no longer a friend of creators. So look us up on YouTube. Until next time, friends, thank you. Stay safe. God bless. And God bless America.
Woken up on November the 4th and found that we knew who our president would be. And nobody wants to have to sit through day after day and endure the chads. Thank gosh we don't have chads this time. Nobody wants to sit around day after day after day after an exhausting campaign to try to figure out who's going to be president, especially at a time when the presidency has never been more important in terms of world affairs. But let me tell you what we got to do. We got to wait. We've got to have patience. Because if we don't do this right and take the time to do it right, God help us if we get it wrong. So thank you for letting me be a part of this today. I thank the President of the United States for asking me to help him. I want you to all fight back. Fight back for America.